Boris Lurie and Wolf Vostell are two artists who have experienced the Second World War and the genocide personally, directly, with traumatic losses. And they are starting their art independent of each other. It's the period when pop art has become really the great thing, and the glamour of the modern life is what's being put into the picture. There's a lot of advertisement, just what pop art is putting into the picture. And both Boris Lurie and Wolf Vostell find that this is something that is quite obscene. They raise their voices against this time, which is just forgetting about all the horrors that have taken place only a very short time ago. And what they are saying in their art, anti-pop, they are saying no to an attitude of forgetting and an attitude of no remembrance of the most horrible things. Boris Lurie has had the experience of losing in 1941 during the executions which took place in the forests of Rumbula, close to the Latvian capital of Riga. He lost all the women in his life, really anything female in his life, his grandmother, his mother, his sister, and the young girl that he was in love with, that he was having his first relationship with. So any emotion that a man could have in relation towards the female body, is linked for Boris Lurie to complete and utter destruction, something which is very deeply traumatic and something which he has experienced and something that he deals with.
After arriving in New York City, Boris Lurie starts incorporating and reflecting on his experience of the last few years in a so-called war series. One of these works you see here, Women in Courtyard, he shows a group of women sitting in an almost classical style. But instead of what you would usually expect, women with full bodies, you see that they're starting to disintegrate. There are loose arms, loose heads, they're missing their necks or their torsos. This is a response to Lurie arriving in New York after years of famine and malnourishment, and experiencing these women free from this oppression.
Wolf Vostell was born as Wolfgang Schäfer in Leverkusen, and during the war his family had to flee from Germany. Vostell believes that his mother was Jewish, there is a Jewish connection, so they went to the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia to hide from the atrocities of the war, and they spent years in a forest in a hut before they returned to Cologne. There is a story that Wolf Vostell and his family, they saw the corpses of pilots lying in the forests. He even saw brains in the trees, something which comes back in an installation that he does later. So it is a very traumatic and life-threatening war experience which he had. Later he was going to go to Paris to study at the Académie des Beaux-Arts, and he completed his studies later at the Kunstakademie in Düsseldorf in the early 60s, which is really then the hotspot where things were happening. Gerd Richter was coming there, Joseph Beuys was there, so it was really in the middle of the most creative center of West German art at that time. And one thing that he invented in 1954 in Paris, he comes across the term décollage. Décollage means a plane lifting off. But décollage, it's a moment of lifting off. Lifting off is also the opposite of collage, of putting things together. So you could also say that a décollage is taking things away from a collage. And what he does, he asked people passing by to take off pieces from advertising campaigns, from advertising posters. And what happens there is that you tear away at the surface of what is being presented to you, and it becomes interesting to see what we will uncover underneath. So this is quite symbolically done in a poster like that, which was really an invitation to a bullfight. But you find the most strange things underneath. And this is, of course, also something that happens to your own memory. If you begin to dig deeper into a story you tell, into the experience you have, into a dream, you will come into the subconscious and you will come across things that are not a smooth unity of appearance, but fractures. And that is, for Wolf Vostell, a very important moment for the creative impetus. You never have one image, but there is something lying underneath, something that has to be seen, something that people try to avoid, but the whole of this together makes for the creative tension, which is very deep in his work. And one work where you can see very beautifully how he does that is called Ihr Kandidat. This is a poster that was a part of a Bundestag election campaign. And Wolf Vostell also here tears away at all these figures. So very disparate elements come together. You see Ludwig Erhard, that is the German chancellor of the economic miracle. But if you tear away at the miracle, at the beautiful consumption society, what do you see underneath? Black and white. It's the Brandenburger Tor, and it says Achtung in the center. Sie verlassen jetzt West-Berlin. Behind this colorful, beautiful, consoling appearance of things, you see the division of the world into Eastern and Western sectors, the division of Germany, which is also the fact of the Cold War. And there is something really deeply threatening about that, because 1 year later there is the Cuba crisis, where we would have nearly stumbled into a nuclear war. And another technique which he developed, and he also calls it a décollage, like all his avant-garde works, is that he begins to blur advertisements that he sees in journals. He developed quite a simple technique. You just have to have some acid on a sponge, and you wipe across a picture of a journal, and you can completely blur the surface. So then you will just have things appearing from underneath. For example, here you have the war, which is part of a nice burger which is being presented. But look to the right side, and you can see there is a war scenario. Vostell always wants to point us to this fact. There is no escaping the fact. Something beautiful, hang on, probably it's just covering something horrible underneath, and I want to show you both.
Throughout his career, Wolf Vostell kept introducing new techniques into his art. In 1958, he was the first artist to incorporate a television set in a work such as this. The television set, which is part of the bigger assemblage, pulls the work into its reality, showing this current TV where you look at the Rijkskanselarij, while you're also looking at the same time at footage from, for example, the war in Ukraine or the floods. Not only does Vostell make use of this cutting-edge technology, he also uses new visual elements. When, for example, in the mid-1960s, the new weather forecast was introduced on German television, he superimposed the images of these high and low pressure areas on top of this image from Treblinka, of women with babies just before execution, and superimposes this weather forecast on top of it. Through these visuals on high and low pressure areas, he takes this image and brings it into the present, showing that even though it happened years ago, it could still happen today.
He was a pioneer, and he was also a pioneer in the Fluxus movement. Together with George Maciunas, he was preparing the International Fluxus Festival of Newest Music in 1962, which took place in the first 3 weeks of September. So at the beginning of the Fluxus movement, we see Wolf Vostell involved right in the heart of things. And he was performing in Wiesbaden during the Fluxus Festival the work called Kleenex. And we see two of the works in these beautiful boxes, which are remaining here, photographs which he blurs with his acid, and he superimposes these light bulbs which the public was actually shooting at during the performance. So you have this imagine the horrible noise, the splintering glass, the explosion of the light bulbs superimposed on current political photographs like de Gaulle and Eisenhower riding in a parade through Champs-Élysées, but also the photo of Lenin. And you must imagine what's happening in this. This is really just a relic of a performance, the happening itself, and for Vostell it is always a happening. The happening, which is taking place in Wiesbaden, Kleenex, has the most absurd forms. For example, let me read some of the things that he asks his public to do. For example, go to your local butcher and ask him to wrap up the meat in one of the most reactionary newspapers. So there is such a lot of energy, there is such a lot of humor, and such a lot of violence as a reality in Vostell's performances. And the public is always part of the happenings. That is just so central. You are not an onlooker, but you do things, and you are really asked to take part. You are asked to shoot or to throw light bulbs against the wall, just to have this experience of what a beautiful thing, you throw light bulbs against the wall, but at the same time you hear the sound of war, destruction, explosions. So he's bringing all these things together.
For the members of Fluxus, the artistic process was more important than the finalized end result. Like Vostell, many of them experimented with performances and happenings and valued the experience of the artwork above the aesthetics. This resulted in a huge variety of installations. One of these installations, the 1970 thermoelektronische kauwgummi by Wolf Vostell, places the visitor in a concentration camp surroundings while carrying a suitcase. Out of the suitcase come these radio sounds intermixed with these distorted sounds of chewing gum. Vostell reproduces this feeling of flight and oppression. And when you exit this installation and leave this feeling of oppression, you can only think of those who couldn't.
In the 70s and then also in the 80s, artists were really experimenting with completely new materials. Think of Richard Serra, who is using rusted steel. Think of Joseph Beuys, who is using the fat or is using the felt. And for Wolf Vostell, concrete is a really important material. He uses it also once more as a media critique. So he takes these television sets and he casts them in concrete. He pours the liquid cement over these electronic devices and he covers them in hard concrete. He presents them in the context of, for example, a museum in Los Angeles where you don't only see these television sets, but you also see a set of 5 or 6 live turkeys who are wandering through the museum.
Always on the lookout for new art forms, Wolf Vostell became a pioneer of video art in the early 1960s. In his first experimental video, Sun in Your Head, Vostell shows distorted images of politicians, military exercises, and news broadcasts. He created this form of decollage of the moving image, in which he confronts the imperialism and consumerism so present in German post-war society.
Here we are looking at Boris Lurie's painting Memos to the US, in brackets, hairdos, and this is really a first. We are very proud as the Kunstmuseum Den Haag, with the support of the Boris Lurie Art Foundation, that this painting is for the very first time shown to the public. And this great painting with all these very many elements combines several things. For one thing, we have the upper class society of the United States, you could say. This is the normative image of femininity. This is the social order. This is how people want to be seen. And at the same time, Boris Lurie immediately juxtaposes this with quite a brutal cut with the repressed image of the feminine, the sexual desire which is kind of dirty in these pornographic images. And he takes us one step lower and one step further to present us with the defiant survivors of the concentration camp, which were also shown on the no box. And once more, we see these images of the corpses from the concentration camp, the repressed image of history. And then, very, very cruelly, he introduces us to a children's drawings book. So he brings us back to the feeling of naivete, which is also like the cliche of a young person coloring in these figures in this painting. And Boris Lurie keeps confronting us with these elements. And he goes further, and of course, we will see the big no. And once more, we see Boris Lurie's drawing in there as well. Also a take on the abstract expressionist art at the time, which, just like pop art, he abhorred, which he hated, because it did not have the courage, did not have the balls, Boris Lurie himself would have said, to face the realities and to stop superimposing a very thin veneer of civilization on the deep barbarity that he knew is the real reality of mankind, at least from the way that he has experienced it to his great own suffering.
Statt Bomben auf Nordvietnam sollten die US-Flugzeuge die Bevölkerung mit Folgendem bombardieren: Masthühner, Schnürriemen, Kaugummi, Tomatenmark, Hamburger, Bagels, Coca-Cola, Sicherheitsnadeln, Beatles Records, Popcorn, Sahnetorten, Schraubenzieher, Radiergummis, 4711, Büstenhalter, Strumpfbänder, Kleenex, Polaroid-Kameras, Reißverschlüsse, Marmelade.
A few years earlier, Boris Lurie makes a series of works in which he shows Henry Cabot Lodge, the former US ambassador to the south of Vietnam, and he keeps altering his face. Cabot Lodge, while ambassador of southern Vietnam, allowed the assassination of the Vietnamese president, spurring his wave of violence across Vietnam. By repeating the image of Cabot Lodge, Lurie mimics the style of pop art, but instead of the beautiful Marilyn Monroe, he uses this harrowing face of American imperialism. And by defacing him, he adds to what he believes pop art lacks, the social and political critique. Just like Wolf Vostell, Lurie proves again and again to be this passionate critic of American and European imperialism and militarism.
Yes, and that's of course a complete continuity to the German fascism that Boris Lurie has himself experienced, and he knows that Wolf Vostell has also experienced it, which has caused all the suffering and all the trauma which has completely destroyed his life. So the continuity is there. Militarism now, fascism now, and it remains a continuing story, and this is what these two men are just so violently opposed to. So there is one personal detail from Boris Lurie's studio. On his studio wall, he kept a collage, and this collage consists of the image of two women, which always remained at the heart of it. And Boris Lurie kept changing the collage. If he found a nice image, he put it on the wall, but it was not a work of art. And what we are looking at is really the total depth of the traumatic experience of loss that he is dealing with for the rest of his life. Boris Lurie returned to Riga in 1975, the story goes, and he found a box with photographs, and one of the photographs there is the very last photo which has been taken of his young love, Luba. It is a photograph, a typical bourgeois kind of picture, where a girl is given an identity. And we see the photograph of Luba on the right side,
And it is combined on this wall with another photograph, an anonymous photograph of a young woman in the moment before she was being shot. And it's a really horrific photograph because on the level of the mass grave, we see a photographer taking the photograph seconds before a woman is shot. We see the executioner standing in the background. And what is happening, and why is this so central for Boris Lurie? During the Holocaust and during the Shoah, the mass executions, people were completely deprived of their identity, with numbers tattooed on their wrists.
And now we come to a point where his life turns around. There is really a deep and strong cut. On the 18th of April 1945, the concentration camp of Magdeburg-Polte is liberated. And 1 year later, on the 11th of June 1946, Boris Lurie is to arrive in New York. He leaves Europe behind, he leaves his whole past, his whole family and everything that he's gone through behind. But with him comes his father, and they're going to live in New York. And this story is kind of very well encapsulated into this box. This is the kind of box that you would hire or buy if you would take the rest of your belongings to go on the long ship journey from Europe to the United States. And if you look closely, you can even see that on one point of the box, there is still something like an address label. On the surface of the box, you see the impressions that are basically sitting on the retina of the artist. What does he remember? What has he seen? He has seen these horrible swastikas, but also now on his retina are images of the victims of the concentration camp. Here we have an inmate of Buchenwald who kind of managed to survive. And also we have, I can see here a Cadillac, so that is the future of America, where he comes through. We see, of course, the symbol for his suffering. That's the David star, the Magen David. And we also see, so many details, but among all the smearing, there's also some of the pornographic images that we find in Boris Lurie's work. And just to make this point clear, there is also a big no written on this box. So all these elements, which are also appearing in other images in this exhibition, are on the surface of what's going on. But think about what is sitting in this box. Of course, this box is dark and empty. This darkness and the emptiness is what is left, is all that is left on the inside of Boris Lurie's emotion. And here we have a photograph of the proud survivors. Well, they're not proud, but they are the defiant survivors who are being liberated on the 7th of May 1945 by the 80th US Infantry Division in the concentration camp of Ebersee. So you see these images of these survivors who are marked by suffering, by these incredible experiences, there on this box as well.
Menschen, die abtransportiert wurden. Mein Dezernat hat hingegen über nicht eine einzige Unterlage verfügt, über die Angelegenheit, die sich dann in den Konzentrationslagern und sonstigen Stellen abspielten.
When Adolf Eichmann, architect of the Shoah, is put to trial in Jerusalem in the early 1960s, one of the guards to his death cell gives him Lolita by Nabokov. After reading through it for a couple of days, Eichmann gives the book back and says it is disagreeable due to the pedophilia in the book. Throughout his work, Lurie keeps on emphasizing this hypocrisy that for him is not only present in Adolf Eichmann, but in the entire post-war society.
We see pornography in the context of images of the Shoah. This is really horrible. It's hard to understand, but I would just really like to make this point. Why does Boris Lurie use these images? What is his attitude? And the point is, and this is really encapsulated in the image that you see here, pornographic image with these prominent breasts in the middle of the image, but superimposed on that is what Lurie says to violence, to war, to abuse, to all kinds of war, and to the abuse also of the female body. It is just one central big no.
Hello, this is John calling from SBA to let the owner know that your Platinum membership with your $8,000 small business credit line benefit has been approved. Please press 0 now, or you can call us toll-free at 1-866-310-961, extension 103. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.
In a way, at the heart of the exhibition, we have one image which is really deeply scandalous and which is really very, very shocking. And this is the moment when Boris Lurie confronts the image of the corpses from a concentration camp with an image of a pin-up girl. What Boris Lurie is doing here in his intentions of protest is that he is confronting these two images, and what's interesting is that the corpses, of course, cannot see, and the model exposing herself to the corpses cannot see either, because it is a photograph from the back. Turn around the paper and there's another page of the newspaper on there. So these figures are all blind. And this image is very much about the economy of the gaze. We, as visitors, as the public, look at these images. We are being drawn into something, the forbidden pleasure of looking and being confronted with a complete shock of something that we do not want to see. So Boris Lurie's art is very much about our own emotion, about our own looking, and about our emotional implication in the economy of how things are being presented, of how we are being entertained by shocking things, and how we are being seduced by little forbidden pleasures.
Hello, this is Terry trying to reach Boris Lurie. This is in regards to good news on the tax matter. Please call me at my office, 1-800-707-865, extension 9042. Thank you. Bye-bye.
The one great and deep urge and longing of Lurie and Vostell really is to make their voices with their unpleasant message to be heard at all. We are looking at a media society in the 1960s, and you can translate that directly to where we are living now in the 2020s, where everything that is allowed is positive and beautiful images, images of the good life and of beautiful self-representation. And the museums are part of that just as much as social media or any commercial images that you see. Boris Lurie and Wolf Vostell, I believe, succeed because of the traumatic experiences that they have gone through in breaking through this superimposed silence of a beautiful and good world, which is anything but.